This week on the It's a Monkey podcast.
Ethereum basically have created a platform to enable smart contracts to happen. And I'll just give a quick thumbnail of what smart contracts is, or are, sorry, should I say. Basically, if you think of a vending machine, if you put your money in, you look for your product, you pick it, you get your sweets out, that's the end of the transaction. Now, the actual vending machine itself carries out all the programming in the background, which is basically an if-then statement. So if you put your money in, then the food comes out. And essentially, smart contracts are a very, very powerful vending machine. Is probably the best way of saying it.
And programmable vending machine.
It's programmable.
Right?
So, for example...
That's the really interesting
Absolutely.
piece.
And especially when it comes to looking at things like the Internet of Things and those type of other technologies. I'll give you an example just so your listeners can sort of get an idea of where this is coming in. Back in October, November time last year, the CBA and Wells Fargo Bank looked at a transaction. This was very, very, very well publicized, where there was cotton that was going from Queensland in northern Australia across to China. Now, once the actual product hit a certain longitude and latitude, there were sensors on the boat that picked up they'd gone through that latitude, which meant they were in Chinese waters. That then enabled a smart contract. If we get past this longitude, latitude, then money will be released.
Good morning, good afternoon, hello, wherever you are in the world. We're recording this podcast on Friday, the 2nd of June. It is June already. It's nearly halfway through the year. Isn't it fun how time speeds up as you get older with each year? And interesting that. You're listening to episode number 95 of the It's a Monkey podcast. We talk about everything relating to tech, startups, entrepreneurship. On the show, we got a great show coming up with you for you. Now, last week we mentioned that Bitcoin had hit an all-time high of around $2,700, $2,800 around that. So I thought I'd drag in Tim Lea, who's the author of a book about Bitcoin and the blockchain called Down the Rabbit Hole. And we had an extensive, fascinating chat to him about what's going on in the Bitcoin space, what's happening with blockchain. And because it's such a convoluted technology, we like to revisit this every now and then because it's quite difficult for us mere mortals to get in the know, to understand all the different building blocks of the blockchain and Bitcoin. So that's a great extended long-form chat that we had with Tim Lea earlier this week in our Sydney downtown studio. But as always, we like to touch base on some of the tech news that's happening. And with me, as usual, probably for the last time in person for a little while, actually, is Kate Frappell. Kate, thanks for joining us.
No worries. Good to be back.
So Kate's going to be off to Canada, going to be working for us from Canada for a little while. So we'll still be doing the podcast. We're probably going to take a 2-week break whilst Kate goes and gets settled across the pond. So we'll be playing some very interesting repeats. We've had some great interviews over the last few years, so we'll play some repeats for you, and then we'll kick it off, and Kate and I will do the podcast at the opposite ends of our Skype line.
Yeah, it'll be an interesting experiment, but I think it'll go well.
I'm sure it will. So, Kate, in the news, interesting Twitter and is it Google engineer have made Apple as
designer.
An ex-Twitter engineer and an ex-Apple designer have made a camera app for the Apple iPhone, where they realized that the Apple iPhone actually has the potential to essentially be a professional camera, and they've created an app that allows you sort of very detailed calibration of a lot of camera features, and it's only $3 or so on the App Store. Tell us a little bit more about this camera app.
Yeah, so this app is launching, it's launched now, $3 to start with, but there's a possibility that it will start rising. It's intended to sit beside the current camera app. So if you think of the current app as to take a quick snapshot of something on the go or like as a reference, so this new app called Halide, I think that's how you would say it, is sort of more professional photography, and it's there for if you want to take a really good photo and you've got time to stop and tweak the exposure and make it a really good piece of photography.
Now, with Android, I've got a pro mode built in where I can fiddle with everything from white balance to the aperture sort of size, the speed, etc. Does that not come native with Apple, or do you have some sort of pro mode with Apple as well?
So Apple mostly rely on their apps. So there are apps where you can make those tweaks, and they've got those capabilities. But inside the native app, a little bit like they have the flash and I've forgotten what it's called now, but the focus, AF, I think.
Autofocus?
Autofocus, that might be it, yeah. They've got things like that, and you can tweak the lighting, but not full-on editing capabilities.
I think Apple try to make their products very idiot-proof, don't they? So they don't like to let you get under the hood very easily. But Android, on my HTC, I've got a pro mode where every now and then, exactly when I do have a bit of time and I'm trying to take a nicer photo, I can fiddle with the aperture, the timing, the ISO, and sometimes you can actually get a nice result. You can actually take the raw, very high definition version of the photo as well.
Yeah, so on the new one, there is a high definition option as well on Apple. And there's even a filter you can change, like black and white, sepia, stuff. And there's a timer as well. So it's got basic features, but not editing capabilities.
I got a notification yesterday that HTC is releasing a brand new phone. Which is going to be interesting because they released, I think, a new one last year. So they've obviously, and it's interesting because they've put the camera very much center. Camera and audio they've put very much center of the new HTC. Where the camera, you can, for example, just squeeze the phone and it brings the camera app up, and then I think you squeeze it again and it takes the photo. And
interesting.
Yeah, and very high quality audio speakers as well. So I'm an HTC fan, been using HTC for ages, and my phone's not that old, but I'd be interested to see how that actually works. Also, latest processors and all sorts of bits and pieces. So HTC is still in the game, and I like the fact that I've got a nice fat external sort of SD card as well. It's like, I don't know, 80 gigs or something, and it's basically empty. I don't need such a big one, but put some music on there, and you can, I think Android supports up to 1 terabyte, something crazy. It's something absolute. I think they're only just starting to manufacture those that big, but it'd be really interesting when those exist. You could carry the whole of Wikipedia literally on your phone,
You could, well, in a way you do. You've got the internet in your pocket.
But even without the internet, you could carry sort of interesting things and movies. But streaming's definitely. Well, what we forget as well is we in Australia, it's relatively cheap bandwidth. I know we complain a lot, but in other countries like India or Africa, it's really expensive. So to have things local and to have light bandwidth version of apps is very important for us.
Useful.
A little bit less so, but. On Spotify, I have a few albums that I've saved locally onto my phone, and it actually does come in handy every now and then when I'm on a plane or camping or something like that, and I've got these few albums. I actually do find myself using it.
Yeah. Oh, I'm similar as well. I've got a few that I can listen to offline on Spotify, which is good because, long story short, I just changed my phone over to prepaid before I go overseas. And now I don't want to chew through all my prepaid data.
Yeah, you got a lot more
so
control.
I just play my saved songs.
So that was the new camera app for iPhone, and it's called what? Halide?
Halide, yeah, HALIDE.
So be worth if you're an iPhone person to have a play with that.
Looks quite good.
And another story out of Google, actually. Google have finally released a new smartboard. Smartboard being, something traditional, like the traditional whiteboard, but using collaboration and networking features. So what's it called?
Google Jamboard.
The Jamboard. So it's sort of like a medium-sized whiteboard that you can write on, draw on, and you can get two-way interaction from remote people. It's also a touch board as well, right?
Yep. So it's 55 inches. And it comes with a pen and touch input. So, really easy to write things, erase things, and it hooks straight into the Google Suite. So all your docs and spreadsheets, images, you name it, you can pull and drag, resize everything on the whiteboard.
And that's really cool. I mean, I think Google are getting more into the enterprise type of space. And this is obviously a very, side project for them. It costs about $5,000 US, which for a company is actually not that much. I mean, we've got a smart board here that I'm actually sitting in the studio / boardroom where I'm staring straight at this whiteboard, and it's a smart whiteboard where people can log on remotely and watch us write on it, and we can save a snapshot of what we write into a file, into a JPEG, but it's only one way. So they can watch the board, our remote team can watch the board, but they can't contribute to the board. Whereas with this Jamboard, it is actually two-way. You can sit with your tablet, watch it, and you can write on there. I'd be interested to try that, though, to see in reality how that actually, if it works well or if it's a bit clunky.
Yeah, how easy it is to navigate around would be a good test.
And of course, with remote work really becoming more mainstream, I know there's a lot of companies that have, Yahoo, Marissa Mayer famously sort of ended remote work, and I think IBM has also sort of cut back on remote work. But, these big companies are a little bit unusual because the smaller and medium-sized companies are moving the other way. They actually giving more flexibility and more, remote work. It suits everyone in terms of being able to hire from different locations, and sometimes even have what they call follow the sun teams, where, for instance, in the technical world, if you have a reliability team, they follow the sun, so it follows your users that are online, and just to check everything's working. And, so there's a variety of benefits or tools for remote work. Are incredibly important. I know for ourselves that we're always looking for tools that help us even capture or sort of maintain a culture with the remote team is hard. And I think a two-way whiteboard is great. One thing I didn't see, did they video? Could you sort of pop a video sort of stream of someone into the board? Because that would be really cool.
I can't say I saw it on the video, but I wouldn't be surprised. I think you would be able to pull stuff in like that. Because
that makes a lot of sense, because one of the issues with remote is sometimes if you've just got someone's voice, it just feels like there's just a resource that's a voice, and there's who's the person behind that voice. So we're trying to, with our team, just have photos and videos, and so we've got a sense of each other that, we want to try and not lose that sense that there's people behind all this work, not just faces and not just Slack names as well.
Definitely. On a bit of a side note, it's interesting from a business point of view. So Jamboard support and management is $600 a year on top of the $5K.
$600 for what are you paying for?
Support and management.
$600 a year.
Yep. So $300 a year for early customers, but $600 a year for everyone else. And that, on top of that, you also need to have access to the Google Suite plan,
which you pay for
as well.
Yeah.
So it's an ongoing cost that they're making money out of as well. It's not a one-off product.
Yeah. No, look, I mean, Google's been trying to for a while to get more into the subscription side of business. Their ads business is very risky. All their money is coming from these ads, and apparently
ads are on the way out.
Yeah, well, I mean, ad blockers and, look, this is a whole other discussion about the philosophy of ads in our culture and in our society. But does anyone consciously enjoy ads? Consciously, no. Right? Subconsciously, we benefit from it because if we have a targeted ad and we discover something we didn't know about, we've benefited from it. And that's the argument. But consciously, do we enjoy seeing things trying to be shoved down our throat? No. So
no. I like ads for things when I've actively sought for one. For example, like now the Jamboard. I'm like, I want to know more about the Jamboard, and so they present me with a video ad.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that's what I want to see.
So the context, right? The context is
everything.
The
context is very important.
But if you're trying to do work and get throughout the day, and you get a pop up for this Jamboard, you're like,
go away. Yeah, definitely. So I like watching ads, especially clever ones. Do you know Aldi? The supermarket? Yeah. So at the moment on TV, they've got a series of ads and they're really funny. Like myself and Jana in the office are always laughing at them. But those sort of ads, I'm like, I like it. And if I came across them online, I would find them entertaining. But yeah, I wouldn't want them shoved in my face.
Yeah, well, that's the Silicon Valley has been criticized that the fact that there's these fantastic products, Facebook, Twitter, Google, and what are most of these super smart people working on? How to do better at ads. And some people say that's when we've got these other huge challenges of environmentalism and political challenges and war and peace, that these super smart minds are working on ads. But that's a topic. That's a topic for another day. There's always, the targeting aspects of Google and Facebook are so great that I would rather have ads on Google and Facebook than other indiscriminate sort of untargeted ads as well, which is even more annoying.
Yeah, you've almost become accustomed to having ads in certain places. It's like on Facebook, I don't mind them as much. The retargeting does bug me a little bit, but I sort of expect Facebook to have a ton of ads now.
Yeah.
Whereas if I'm browsing Medium and an ad came up, that would really annoy me.
Yeah. Interesting. Anyway, you're listening to Kevin Garber. I'm the CEO of ManageFlitter and Manage Social. Manage Social's in very, very early alpha for a handful of people. We're still working very hard at it, but watch this space if you're a Twitter and Instagram marketer. I'm with Kate Frappell, who's my co-host, who is the design lead at ManageFlitter and Manage Social. We're going to take a break, and then we're going to chat to Tim Lea, who's the author of Down the Rabbit Hole, a book about Bitcoin and blockchain. It is a nice, lengthy, meaty interview, so we're going to leave it at that. We're not going to do a post-mortem of that interview because it does go for quite a little while. The following 2 weeks, we're going to play repeats, and then Kate and myself are going to be back on board with some new podcasts. So thanks so much for joining us. Stick around. We're going to be back with this super great interview after this break.
The It's a Monkey podcast is brought to you by CheckDog. Use CheckDog to easily review and monitor your website for spelling errors, broken links, and broken images, all with the push of one button. CheckDog can also automatically monitor your website and notify you of newly introduced spelling errors. Go to checkdog.com/podcast to receive 50% off your first month subscription. CheckDog.com, helping the world's leading websites keep their content error-free.
You're back with It's a Monkey podcast. Now, we chat about everything relating to tech, economy, startups, and probably if you are a regular listener to this podcast, you'll hear me going on a little bit about Bitcoin and blockchain. Now, I think we first spoke about Bitcoin and blockchain quite a few years ago on this podcast when James Peter, the co-founder of ManageFlitter, was still working with us. And I remember at the time, I really had absolutely no idea what it was all about. I still basically have no idea, but just maybe a little bit more. But we're lucky enough in Sydney to actually have a Bitcoin blockchain expert that's actually written a book, Down the Rabbit Hole, which is all about Bitcoin and the blockchain and the changes that it's bringing. And I've dragged him back into the studio fresh off the plane from the States where he's been at a cryptocurrency conference, and we're going to talk all about that as well. Happy to say again, because he's been on the podcast a couple of times, but there's been so much going on. I said to Kate, who's my co-host and co-producer, that we just need to talk about blockchain again and Bitcoin. There's too much going on. So Tim Lea, who's the CEO of Veredictum, and he's the author of Down the Rabbit Hole. Thank you so much for popping into the Sydney studio.
Oh, thanks for having me in, Kevin. I'm a bit jet lagged from having flown in from the States yesterday, but it's all good to go.
It's a big flight that. Now, Tim, before we get into all the juicy stuff about what's been going on, got a little surprise for you that we've spoken a little bit on this podcast about a person called Jimmy, who's this mystical person that we get.
Right.
We've dragged him into the technological revolution, kicking and screaming. Jimmy's been worked with me for about 10 years as an internal accountant, and we talk about all sorts of bits and pieces. And I actually handed him a copy of your book because I've been saying, Jimmy, check out this technology, and this book is great. It demystifies it. And Jimmy's been popping in every now and then to me and has been talking about concepts that from your book. So I thought I'd drag Jimmy into the studio and we talked to Jimmy a little bit about your book. So, and he can give us a little bit of an insight as almost a non-technologist and an outsider, so to speak, about his perception about the blockchain as well as in particular about the book. So Jimmy Shumwell, first time officially welcoming you on the podcast. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Well, I think it's good to be here, but we'll see how it goes. Yeah, no, I appreciated Kevin loaning the book to me or giving it to me, whichever way it is. I found it interesting, and to discuss the book briefly, I think what is a very complex process was very well described. And what I liked about your book was that not only was it detailed, but not so detailed that you got bored. The examples you gave were really good because they brought it to life. It showed what was happening, like the Silk Road, Dado, those sort of things. The examples of how different, to explain aspects, to actually show what would happen under certain circumstances, as an example, not an actual event, and a wide ranging of topics that you covered. For example, getting funding for startups, how that's progressed, and all of the related items. The interesting thing for me overall, I guess, was that I thought Bitcoin was it, but it isn't. It's the blockchain. I mean, Bitcoin just happens to be an application or a process that's been put onto that underlying fundamental, whatever you call it. I'm not IT. Kevin said something like more or less, but I'm not even, I'm a dinosaur when it comes to that part of the world. It's also one of the things that sort of came through to me quite often was where this is all going to lead, particularly from a social and financial point of view. By the social aspect, what I mean is the seeming difficulty that governments are going to have to control what's flowing through it, and how they can overcome that. And I get that there's a lot of people that want to reduce control almost to non-existent. I personally, coming from the old school, see that as a negative. I think humans haven't got to the point yet in our development where we can be trusted. I really believe
that's exactly why we need the blockchain. That's the exact reason.
No, but underneath that, it's if people get into that and then there's no control over them over
and they
the top.
manipulate it.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Certainly, peer-on-peer is fine. Where you doing a deal with somebody and you getting that agreed and tested and you know that it's factual. But when you get hold of it and somebody makes use of it, i.e. the Silk Road, and the difficulty they were actually lucky, seemingly getting hold of that. But getting hold of the underlying troubles in the Silk Road.
But you know what's so interesting, Tim, is, and this is why I wanted to bring Jimmy in to talk about this, because a lot of the analogy is made that that blockchain is analogous to the internet in 1995, and I wanted to bring Jimmy in, and it's interesting because it's been an enthusiast's territory up until now, but a total technological outsider, with all due respect, Jimmy,
it's true,
is starting to get their head around these technologies.
I mean, I think I'll just take on board one of Jimmy's points, which I think is very, very valid about governments wanting to try and control this. I don't think they will actually control it per se. I think they'll embrace it. And we're already seeing a number of nations looking at setting up digital cryptocurrencies. Even Australia is looking at it, allegedly. And one of the powers,
Estonia, right?
Yes, I mean Estonia.
They're always on the cutting edge of Estonia. I've got to go visit that place.
Funnily enough, Dubai. I was speaking at a conference in Dubai literally a couple of weeks ago, and what they're doing there, they are deliberately trying to take over from Estonia, but that's a much wider issue. But the power of a digital currency from a governmental point of view is you can see where money is being spent in real time.
So you can imagine the statistics you can pull from
Precisely
that.
right. The data you're going to get from that in terms of controlling the economy, you can say, right, the money's being spent on cars, or the money's being spent on houses, or it's being spent wherever it's being spent.
Or how's this? If suddenly all this cold and flu medication, right, 1 week starts getting spent. I mean, Google helps with this as well. You can see health trends.
Precisely. You can actually judge and you can plan the whole economy on the basis of digital data coming from the currency. So I think in terms of controlling it, they will have a nightmare trying to control it, but they'll embrace the technology. That's the way that I see it.
Great.
I probably missed that government would be able to see what was happening. I sort of saw the whole lot as subterranean, i.e. a deal between two people or a conglomerate, and that one had to be within that process to be able to even see what was going on. Now, if data can be withdrawn from it by an external party that shows what's happening, then a lot of what I said gets taken away, because I saw it as being totally subterranean, not accessible, and therefore open to things like the silk trade and other things, Silk Road, I mean. And that's where I was a little bit reticent about. I see the fantastic advantages of this and where it's going, and a host of things. Provenance, as an example, the what is it? The iNet or something? The thing net? What do you call it? It's the development of things rather than
the internet
data.
Internet of
IoT. That seems to have unlimited potential.
I think also where you talk about subterranean, I think, and Tim may have greater insight into this, is when you say countries are potentially developing their own digital currencies. So Bitcoin is anonymous or quasi-anonymous, but a country can craft their own programmable money, for lack of a better word, that does provide insights to a certain degree of transactions that differs to Bitcoin. Is that correct? Am I correct in
Absolutely.
saying
that's their aim. Obviously, it's not going to happen a week on Tuesday, but it's in the medium term. That's where a lot of countries are heading. The Philippines are looking at it. Estonia, as you quite rightly highlight. Dubai. As I say, even Australia is looking at it. So it's going to happen in the medium term, but in the very short term, some of the major banks are actually working with the cryptocurrency community, such as Ethereum, for example, is actually working with Banco Santander, and they're creating a currency, for example, called Cash ETH, where the digital currency is actually backed by Banco Santander's money.
I've said this. I've got a friend that works in finance, and their operations. It's a boutique investment bank, but they very well connected. And I keep on saying to him, through your connections in Australia, even just a wallet that's aligned with a bank, I don't know why it hasn't happened. It is the most obvious thing in the world.
It's already happening. It's right in the development labs right now, but it's absolutely happening. You can bet your bottom dollar. CBA here in Australia have got their own innovation labs, and obviously they keep their cards very close to their chest, understandably what they're doing. But I would lay money that they're working deeply on something like this. If they would be fools not to. Absolutely. It's the way things are going to go. There's no question about it.
I think his name's Ian Nureyev, the CEO of Combank. A few months ago at a talk actually said, if we don't, as an industry, innovate very quickly, we are not going to exist in a few years. They know it, so they know it.
It's going to be death by 1,000 cuts, where little bits of all their businesses, the most profitable bits, are going to be eaten away.
So Jimmy Shimwell, thank you very much for joining us. Jimmy is an internal accountant at ManageFlitter, and he's the philosopher in residence as well, I would say. Kate, would you agree? Philosopher in residence is a good title for him? Yeah, philosopher in residence, and Jimmy seemed to enjoy the book about the blockchain, Down the Rabbit Hole, Tim's book. So I'm sure, and I know I keep going on about it, but I used to say this about the internet. I used to say this about Twitter. My track record is relatively good, my ego says. So it's a great place to start down the rabbit hole. I've bought a ton of books on cryptocurrency and Bitcoin, and Tim's is one of them as well. So Jimmy, thanks so much for joining us on the podcast. We might drag you now that we've broken the seal. We may drag you in every now and then, especially for your more philosophical opinion someday.
It'll have to be not related to IT.
Thanks, Jimmy.
Okay, thanks.
So, Tim, let's get into the heart and the juice of it. You've just come back from New York. The last 2 weeks have been absolutely mad. We spoke about on last week's podcast where Bitcoin hit a new high. I think it's peaked at about 2,800 US for one Bitcoin. Obviously, Ethereum's got mad as well. We can talk a little bit about Ethereum, which has just burst onto the scene. And what I love most about Ethereum is created by a 23-year-old Russian kid, right? Which is just so much what the spirit of the new sort of technology has been about since the internet, that it just gets disrupted from the side by someone that just, out of the blue and just changes everything. And then you have big organizations shaking in their boots about a technology created by a 23-year-old, But let's the floor's yours. I guess let's and I also want to chat about the CD,
The ICOs,
the
initial coin
ICOs,
offerings.
which a lot of people have been asking me about the ICOs. But let's first talk about the last few weeks, about the Bitcoin, about Ethereum. What's gone on that it suddenly has just gone on such a bull run? The cryptocurrency side of things.
Well, it's really interesting. I mean, I was at Consensus, which is the world's largest blockchain conference in New York, and there were about 2,700 people there. So it was up from about 1,500 last year, and it was manic. The whole place was just buzzing. Phones were buzzing left, right, and center with new notifications of the highest on Bitcoin, the highest in Ethereum, all this type of stuff. And you're right in the epicenter of 2,700 people who are just total crypto enthusiasts and blockchain enthusiasts, and who are living, eating, breathing crypto. And it was crazy because
Were
there
the
was also,
Winklevoss twins there? So they live in New York, and they've been trying to get a cryptocurrency ETF.
They've tried to get an ETF approved 4 times now. I mean, I went to a number of the regulatory sessions, and in New York, the regulators are way behind so many other regulators
Is that right?
in the worldwide. Absolutely.
That surprises me, because the startup conferences I've been to New York, they've always got representatives from the state and from the city pushing for New York to be at the cutting edge and to getting the smartest people from around the world moving to New York.
Yeah, I mean, New York itself is full of incredibly bright people. I met so many interesting people when I was there. But the regulators as a whole, I mean, I'm comparing to, say, Singapore, the UK, and here in Australia,
Right.
where, for example, we've got a sandbox,
Right.
where you can actually, within certain confines, not just blockchain, but other technologies, you can play with fintech services. They haven't got anything like that in the States, for example. And it was very much, I was at this panel where they had 4 really high-profile lawyers in New York, and it was almost as if, well, yeah, we're starting to talk to the regulators a bit, and there's a little bit of engagement. Whereas here in Australia last year, one of the fintech meetup groups, the guy that coordinates that had 5 of the regulators in a room talking to 300 startups.
Interesting. So at least New York, at least is. I mean, maybe they've been a little bit distracted with the last year, with the last 2 years with politics.
I mean, the politics undoubtedly has had some influence, but in New York they tried to implement what is known as the BIT license, which was to try and regulate the Bitcoin exchanges and the whole Bitcoin environment. And it's been, to quote a number of people within the industry there, it's been a farce. A lot of people refuse to even deal with New York State now. They actually deliberately set up their accounts, and anybody who's got a New York State IP address, they can't get access to a lot of services. So it's backfiring, and the biggest challenge is that innovation and regulation are always going to be completely in juxtaposed positions. The regulators are always way, way, way behind the innovation. And when it comes to regulation with ICOs, as you're talking about, the majority of the initial coin offerings, the ICOs or token sales, most of the ICOs will not enable people from the states to actually buy into the ICOs.
And of course, another factor that pushed all of this ahead was Japan lifting its 8% tax on Bitcoin, using Bitcoin as a currency for day-to-day transactions. Right?
And it's the same here in Australia with the double taxation. That's now been lifted. So it's, the other regulators around the world are far more ahead as compared to the States in general terms. And that really came across.
Surprising. I mean, we had Anil Dash on the podcast, a New York-based entrepreneur and commentator, and he actually worked with the Obama administration on tech. And one of the things that he said is that the tech literacy in Congress is frighteningly low. He said frighteningly low, and he said that's a real issue. And and if I'm quoting him correctly, he did say the current administration is even worse. So that's a problem. But let's talk a bit about Ethereum, because a lot of people hadn't heard of Ethereum before the last couple of weeks. Compare and contrast a little bit the difference between Bitcoin, Ethereum, and how is the blockchain common to both, and what's the different use cases for both?
Well, let's start with Bitcoin. I mean, blockchain is the technology that underpins Bitcoin. That's the easiest way to say that. Now, Bitcoin is, as a technology, is absolutely amazing. The more I've written about it, the more I've researched it, the more I've talked to people about it. If we ever knew who Satoshi Nakamoto was, he'd be up for a Nobel Prize for economics or something. It's
What's
amazing.
the latest on that theory, by the way? Group of people.
It's
you know,
it's all over
Is
the
it
shop.
Mark Andreessen? You know.
Well, I mean, in the book, I sort of look at some of the theories, and my favorite one, if I'm brutally honest, is they talk about Satoshi in Japanese means wisdom, and they talk about Nakamoto meaning middle. With the island, I think it's the middle of the Reiku Islands is where Nakamoto as a word sort of comes from. So the idea is middle wisdom implies central intelligence agency. So some people think it could be the NSA and the CIA. I mean, personally, I think
they that smart. With all due respect to them?
The NSA have, they do a lot of stuff. I mean, just ask Snowden, who's in Russia at the moment. But I think personally, because Satoshi Nakamoto, whoever he, she, or they is, still have 1 million bitcoins locked into just held, which has never been moved.
But one thing I've wondered, right? They released a white paper, right? That's how this all started.
Correct.
Right.
In November 2008, originally.
Okay, is there no reverse engineering how this white paper was released and where it was released from?
Oh, they've got an email address for Satoshi Nakamoto, but he went completely offline in 2011.
So they would have covered their tracks.
Yeah, completely. And the theory is it could be a number of people, a variety of people, but bearing in mind there's 1 million bitcoins, which is today's value is I've got to make sure I get my maths right.
It's 1 million times.
It's about 2.2 billion. 2.2
Yep.
billion.
Yep.
Of actual cash, just waiting for somebody to hack if they really wanted to. And it hasn't been touched ever since day one. And there are two core theories that are going around. One theory is that he's dead, he's died, and that the keys have been lost, or just the keys have been lost. Because
Mount Cox.
No. Yeah, I mean that could be an interesting idea, but the theory is that the private keys have just been lost, or the actual person who is Satoshi Nakamoto has passed away and they can't find the keys.
Look, I mean, and we'll continue down explaining the Bitcoin versus Ethereum, but if Ethereum could be created by, I think his name's Vitalik
Buterin is his name. I mean, it's in tandem with others. I mean, there's a
foundation.
But
spearheaded by him as a 23-year-old. There's no doubt that this white paper it could have been written by one very incredibly smart individual.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, in terms of writing white papers, I mean, we're writing a white paper right now for our token sale in July. But it takes a lot of work and it requires a lot of different parties to get involved. So. Yeah, I mean, Vitalik Buterin and his team are incredible, and there's a company in New York called Consensus with a Y that is run by a guy called Joe Lubin, who was one of the original Ethereum Foundation members and creators, and they're pushing it much more in a commercial direction, it seems to be. And there's rumors that Vitalik himself is going to take himself back from the limelight to concentrate just on the product.
So let's just backpedal again a bit. So if people still don't quite understand the Ethereum piece, Bitcoin is built upon blockchain technology, and it is a cryptocurrency, or as I like to say, it's programmable money. I know that's a little bit of an oversimplification.
Yep.
But it does have elements of that. How does Ethereum and Ether fit into that?
Okay. Ethereum basically have created a platform to enable smart contracts to happen. And I'll just give a quick thumbnail of what smart contracts should I say. Basically, if you think of a vending machine, if you put your money in, you look for your product, you pick it, you get your sweets out, that's the end of the transaction. Now, the actual vending machine itself carries out all the programming in the background, which is basically an if-then statement. So if you put your money in, then the food comes out. And essentially, smart contracts are a very, very powerful vending machine. Is probably the best way of saying
programmable vending machine.
It's programmable.
Right?
So, for example...
That's the really interesting
absolutely,
piece.
and especially when it comes to looking at things like the Internet of Things and those type of other technologies. I'll give you an example, just so your listeners can sort of get an idea of where this is coming in. Back in October, November time last year, the CBA and Wells Fargo Bank looked at a transaction. This was very, very well publicized, where there was cotton that was going from Queensland in northern Australia across to China. Now, once the actual product hit a certain longitude and latitude, There were sensors on the boat that picked up they'd gone through that latitude, which meant they were in Chinese waters. That then enabled a smart contract. If we get past this longitude, latitude, then money will be released. And so that was an incidence of a smart contract being looked at for trade finance. So the actual transaction, instead of it taking 3 days for money to get internationally, the monies were effected in about 35 minutes, I think, from memory. Don't quote me on that.
So, Tim, do you think, blockchain technology, Ethereum, it's very similar to the internet of 1995, where today most people, and my co-host and co-producer Kate is sitting here with me and uses the internet every day now. I would bet my bottom dollar, and I don't mean to put Kate on the spot, that Kate doesn't know what TCP/IP is, right? Heard of the word? No, haven't heard of the word. Now, in the internet in 1995, you'd probably be hard-pressed at least not to hear of the word.
I'd agree.
Right. So is the Ethereum and blockchain revolution going to affect everyone, but basically in a few years, no one will actually even know what it's about?
Exactly right. I think it's going to be, nobody cares how the waterworks work. All they want is the water come out of the tap. And it's going to be exactly that same idea, that there'll be lots of services being offered. You won't know that the blockchain's in the background, but it will be. And it's where it'll take away trusted entities all through the economy.
Now, the example that you gave, the smart contract of cotton, being sold and distributed and delivered, for some people may sound like something that's actually quite boring and not relevant to them. Can you give us something that
Yeah, okay. I mean, a lot of the use cases that are being developed within financial services,
right?
Realistically speaking, I mean, there are lots of
people like spinning logos, and they like cats.
I know. I can't think of a cat in a smart contract. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I guess. We're working on royalty distribution for film and video. I mean, it's still a little bit sort of business to business in terms of the smart contracts, but it's the idea as soon as money comes in for a film or video, by smart contracts, it automatically spits out the money to everybody that's been involved. So, for example, this can often be the case if you've got a rock band, for example, that's produced a song, and maybe there was a bass guitarist that played the licks, there was a drummer, this type of thing, and they will actually have a percentage of the royalties coming in. So a smart contract would enable, as soon as the song gets royalties from being played on the radio, then bang, the money gets distributed to all the artists that have played. That type of thing is another example. With cats and dogs, I'm just trying to think
that's okay.
How we can look
put
at
you on the spot. So Bitcoin and Ether, which is the coin, so to speak, the cryptocurrency on top of Ethereum, are in a way only loosely related to the technology that's underpinning it. And I think what we need to do as well is, we don't give any financial advice. We're not qualified to as well. But people need to tread a little bit carefully in this world. I've had a lot of people that called me when they saw that Bitcoin just went from $800, to $2,800. But it's still a bit of the Wild West out there, right?
Yeah, in the past 2 years, Bitcoin has risen by 800%. That's insane. I'm happy because I've got some Bitcoin, but it's absolutely insane. And when I was at the Consensus conference, and there was actually another conference the day after called the Token Forum, which is just dedicated to looking at initial coin offerings, which I know we're going to touch on in a second. But they had a waiting list of 250 people to get into a room of about 150 people. It just gives you the indication that it was really hotting up. And because there's a lot of new money that's come into the Bitcoin and into Ethereum over the past 3 months, because the cryptocurrency market capitalization has doubled in the past 3 months.
But it's still small enough to be manipulated, right?
Yeah, it's still small enough to be manipulated. I did take some indication of some numbers just to sort of put it into perspective. The cryptocurrency market literally as of today is worth about $84 billion. So it's not, if you think that's probably, I don't know what the size of Google or Apple are, but it's probably about the size of
Twitter's about 10 billion. So
right,
and then the smaller end of things.
Yeah. So 84 billion is not massive, but what you've actually got to be aware of, and anybody getting involved in Bitcoin and Ethereum or other cryptocurrencies, is that people have been in this for a long period of time. There are people who have bought Bitcoin for $1 maybe back in 2010, and those are now sort of worth I mean, it's just insane amounts of money. And so you've got what is known as whales in the marketplace. And they actually push the price up and they push the price down because it's unregulated. These are people who have actually
just
bought
individuals?
or mined Bitcoin over the last 5-6 years.
I think if you would have bought $100 worth of Bitcoin in 2010, it would be worth something like 4 million or
it's something
million
insane.
It's something
but
ridiculous.
What happened was at the consensus conference and the coin summit, and there was also a thing called the Ethereal summit on the Thursday beforehand. Everything was just consolidated and concertinaed into this week of sheer pulsating sort of cryptocurrency space. So the prices were just going crazy. And it was at that sort of point I looked at the charts and said, hang on a second, this just can't go up. Because if ever you see a parabolic rise in any cryptocurrency, you know there's going to be a parabolic fall directly after, if it goes up that insanely. When it got up to $2,800, and indeed in South Korea it was trading at $3,000, you just sort of say, well, yes, it's got value from its network effect, but that's way over the top. So like myself, like others, hedged a bit, just sort of thinking, hang on a second, this could be a bit concerning. So I sold out of some and then transferred into US dollars. The key thing is that then plummeted by about 35% in the space of about a matter of hours. And that what you notice happens whenever there's any hint of any bad news. Bad news in stocks and shares and anything else like that normally pushes the price down. But the whales get behind any bad news and they push it down further because they know that anybody getting in around now is going to be fairly fresh money. And they know
they'll panic easily.
They'll panic because all markets are driven by two primal features. One is fear and one is greed.
And if you can be fearful when others are greedy and
that's
greedy
right.
when others
Warren
are fearful.
Buffett, that's what he says.
And you know what? It is so... It is so true. I had a friend and, I love him. He's a good friend of mine and he wanted to buy some cryptocurrency and I said, be careful. And as he bought it, started going down. And he said, whenever I buy something, it goes down. It's because it's people get in on the hype cycle. Right.
That's it. It's the fear of missing out. It's the greed. I don't want to miss out. And then, of course, it plummeted by 35%. Now, I mean, like others, I waited until it bounced back a couple of times to make sure that it came back up. And I bought in, it was about 1,800 just on the way back up. And luckily, it's at about 2,200. I'm not saying I'm a guru, far from it.
No one's a guru. That's the thing. No one can beat the market. If someone, I think, as I said to another friend the other day, that I think there's probably about 10 people in the world that can consistently beat the market. Probably the guys that own the 10 biggest hedge funds, your Ray Dalio and those people. Everyone else can't beat the market.
Precisely right.
And if you think you can, good luck with that one.
I think it's one of those things, if anybody's going to get involved in cryptocurrency markets, just only play, if ever you do, and quite right as you say, this is not investment advice, just only play with what you can afford to lose. Because
let's quickly talk about, a lot of people ask about the mechanics of buying cryptocurrency. It is a bit of fun to be in this game. So yes, play with what is absolutely meaningless money for you. Don't put grandma's superannuation in there.
That's right.
You need an exchange where you can actually exchange normal fiat money into cryptocurrency.
Correct.
And often these exchanges have a wallet, a hosted and in the cloud wallet attached to it, right?
Yeah, I mean, one has to be very, very careful because 30% of all exchanges have been hacked.
And I saw you posted that on the Sydney Startups group, and I've been telling everyone that stat.
Yeah,
I'm saying buy it, but remember, nearly half of these online wallets have been hacked.
Yeah,
which means you could lose everything.
Because if you think about the reality, most of those cryptocurrency exchanges have been set up within the past 2 to 3 years. So they are new starts. So as a result, they won't have a lot of capital behind them to actually either recuperate losses or have put the infrastructure in place. So absolutely be very, very cautious with the exchanges. That said, I mean, I personally use a company, a US exchange called Poloniex.
I've heard of that one because they do Ether as well, right?
They've got about 130 different cryptocurrencies that they have, and they've put some very strong security measures in place. So there's a minimum amount that's actually connected directly to the internet. Lots of it's in cold storage. And the same with a company called Bittrex. The same. These have both got very good reputations. Of course, they could get hacked. So
and you
it's
don't really
always
know
caveated
what's.
and
I mean,
put on.
I mean, we have an online company, but unless you people that are working with our infrastructure every day, you actually don't know what the quality of the security is. I mean, online security is almost can be considered just like real world security, right? It can always be better. It's only as strong as its weakest link. You can have all the security in the world, and if it's an inside job, it means absolutely nothing.
That's absolutely right, because one of the things about the Bitcoin and the blockchain in general is that we are becoming our own banks, because we've actually got the private keys to our cryptocurrencies. Now, what that means is if somebody gets your private key, that's like you leaving an open wallet on the table.
So this is an interesting point as well, because you can have a wallet in the cloud, which is on one of these services, but you could also have a wallet on your own computer, right? And where in a way that you become responsible for the security.
You are absolutely. And it's, there is dedicated malware out there looking for private keys. So you've got to be very clever and you've got to be very careful. And it's quite ironic because a lot of people who own a lot of Ethereum or Bitcoin actually put their private keys on a bit of paper and put it into a safety deposit box in a bank, which I find is so ironic that the technology that disrupts, I know, the technology that disrupts is actually protected by the technology it's trying to disrupt.
There was an article in the Sydney Morning Herald this week, I'm sure you saw it, about some chap that threw away a hard drive a few years ago, and he's realized that it had some Bitcoin sitting on there, and
you hear so many of those stories. I mean, the very, very first ever transaction was for 2 pizzas for 22,000 Bitcoin, which in today's money would be worth
an expensive pizza,
about $450 million or something.
And I believe there is a USB wallet that is very secure, has got all sorts of interesting features where if you lose it, you can transfer it to another USB key. I'll just actually bring up the name. I'll confirm the name of that product. I haven't actually tried it myself, but I am. That's an interesting angle as well. Yeah,
Trezors are probably the biggest one. I haven't actually got one myself yet, but I'm about to get a hold of one.
I'll just. It's called the Ledger Nano. Have you heard of that one?
That's another one. Yeah, there are a few brands coming up.
So that's an interesting. So if you are wanting to buy a few cryptocurrencies, get to understand a little bit of the difference between the different wallets and how you have to look after them. Just like cash, it's even more important than just your email address. It's actually cash sitting there. So treat it as rich and don't assume that these companies are all created equal. In Australia, I use CoinJar.
Right. Yes.
I haven't got into the Ether game yet. There was another Australian company someone recommended to me that does Ether as well.
I use BTC Markets.
Right.
I know the guys there. Again, all these exchanges, it is caveat emptor, that they could get hacked. I'm not saying they will, but they could, But that's. Entering the cryptocurrency space is not for the faint-hearted. It's not for those that don't have an element of risk appetite, or at least understanding the risks. I think is probably the key way of saying it.
And look, that's why people love property so much, because there's a psychological benefit of being able to see your investment, and that it, in theory, at least in the big cities, it can't really just go poof and it's gone. Whereas with cryptocurrencies, or even with shares, in Australia we had HIH, people lost everything. There were other shares can just literally go poof, and that's why regulation is so important. And there's a time and a place for government, and I think making sure that these markets stay above board and liquid and legitimate is incredibly important, because then we can all do exciting things on top of the markets. But without that, it's impossible.
I would actually agree with you. And a true testament to this are the initial coin offerings, because those are.
Well, let's talk about these, because these have been popping up all over. Yeah. Now, I know startups, in the startup world, one of the biggest challenges is getting capital for your startup. Either, it comes from your own back pocket, it comes from sweat equity, or it comes from external investment. But now there's this whole new world of raising for your startup.
It's incredible as a structure for. It's not going to work for every business, I have to say that front end, but these things called initial coin offerings or token sales, that they are strictly speaking beginning to be dubbed as, are neither debt nor equity. and you can raise significant amounts of money without it actually being debt, which you have to pay back, or it is equity. It's neither of those two. So I'll give you an example. With Ethereum, we spoke about Ethereum before, all right? Ethereum is the cryptocurrency that powers the Ethereum network, which looks at administering smart contracts, as we were talking about earlier on. So every time a smart contract is carried out, you pay a small bit of Ether, which is their cryptocurrency coin. So the idea is the more successful the platform, the more of those Ethers are required, and the more the price rises. Okay? So as a result, what you've actually got is a cryptocurrency that, as the platform that's being developed gets better and better and better, the price with reasonable expectation will rise. Now, so from that particular point of view, initial coin offerings, I mean, they raised about $18 million in November 2014. And those cryptocurrency coins at that time were issued at 35 cents, and they're now worth about $220. So in 2.5 years, it's just insane growth. So what actually happens is, with initial coin offerings, it's just like crowdfunding, but for blockchain-based platforms. So, for example, if you think of a traditional crowdfunding structure, maybe there's a new mobile phone you're creating, whatever it might be, people actually pay money up front to get the mobile phone. The organization that's selling them then arranges to get those produced, and maybe you get the product in 12, 18 months' time. Okay, so with crowdfunding, you've got that lead time of maybe 12, 18 months before you actually get the product. So it's a bit of a leap of faith. With the cryptocurrency space, just like the Ethereum structure, where the token or the cryptocurrency coin is being used to power that platform, what happens is people buy the token up front. Okay, and then the combination of everybody buying all those tokens gives enough money to develop the platform.
So does it have to be a platform-based business?
Essentially, the majority are. Now, I mean, a token can represent a digital asset. For example, there are 820 cryptocurrencies around. A couple of those are actually backed by gold, or one's backed by US currency. So so the token can be represented by an asset behind it, but the majority are based around platforms. So, for example, I'll paint an example. We're developing a decentralized anti-piracy and distribution platform for the film and video industry. Okay, so what we're trying to do is trying to bring together all the creative community to help us solve a problem that affects the whole creative community. Okay. And so what we're doing is, if you've heard of SETI, SETI out of Berkeley, the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence. So they beam data out into space. Data comes back. They don't have the processing power to process it all. They put it out to about 3 million people around the world, and those guys run a bit of software in their computer, and the data is then processed and sent back to Berkeley.
And then they hand over the info to the NSA.
Yeah, quite possibly get rewarded with Bitcoin from there. No, but so what we're doing is creating the SETI for searching for pirated content.
Right.
All right. So individuals will run a little bit of software on their computer, use a bit of their surplus bandwidth, and when they find pirated content, they then get rewarded via cryptocurrency, which will be Ventana, which is the name of the coin that we're launching. So the idea is that we're actually rewarding people for
bounty.
for finding pirated content, but it's all software driven. It's not, they don't have to do anything. So it's just committing bandwidth and computing power, like Bitcoin. Bitcoin is produced by lots and lots of computer power, lots and lots of electricity, and providing you can get a Bitcoin in, which is worth more than the electricity that it costs you to produce, you're making money. And that's the same structure that we're looking at. So other initial coin offerings do a similar type of thing, where there will be a reason for the token to exist.
So say there's someone living in a country town and they all decide that they want an e-commerce site that just sells healthy food, because it's hard to get healthy food in the town. And one person says, I'd like to create an e-commerce site to make healthy food available in Whoop Whoop, and I could go to Kickstarter and do something and get some money to create this for the town. Is this funding structure, could it be fitted into that type of model?
Not really, because you can do that with traditional structures. You just create a website, you put up whole food, there you go, there's cash, and you've got a standard e-commerce site. But for example, with what we're doing, we're also creating a distribution platform for people to actually enable white hat BitTorrenting. So the idea is, instead of people putting up a video and it's illegal and everybody's sharing it, we want to do a white hat version so that people can get rewarded for making available some bandwidth.
So it's almost when there is a benefit in creating their own ecosystem and own currency that is only useful in that network.
Absolutely. And it's for example, it might be that people might get a cent for contributing part of their bandwidth to enabling, I don't know, let's say Silicon Valley from HBO, which I'm a big fan of as a TV show, for actually helping to distribute that to a whole network of people. And if you do it as a cent in the traditional reward mechanism, credit card fees are 35 cents a pop.
Sure,
you can't do it. It's unworkable.
So they would get many cents in this, let's just call it V-coin.
Yes.
And through some exchange, eventually, if they want to...
This is the key thing. This is the major difference between a crowdfunding structure like Kickstarter and an ICO or a token sale, because literally normally between 3 to 4 weeks after an initial coin offering has happened, the cryptocurrency tokens are available on the cryptocurrency exchanges to be sold, bought and sold against Bitcoin. And the market defines the value.
So there's liquidity quite quickly.
There's liquidity very quickly. So instead of waiting for your mobile phone for 12, 18 months, you can actually sell your tokens if you wanted to, or you keep holding them, right? But the market will determine the value against Bitcoin. So what you see in the market with cryptocurrencies in general, and we'll talk about Ethereum specifically because that's relevant to what we've been talking about. When Ethereum announced what is known as the Ethereum Alliance, where they were bringing in 200 major corporates to work with them. Companies like Samsung, for example, working with Ethereum. The price just rocketed, all right? Because immediately that implies if you've got a major... It's
confidence.
It's confidence. And it's a major company coming in to say, I support this currency. And if that's the case, the platform itself is going to grow and the price will therefore grow. So you've got these dynamics that are going on and it's very similar to an equity, very similar in terms of if you look at buying into an equity in any market, you're going to look at the core features of the company that's actually there. So whether it's, I don't know, sort of Telstra in Australia's a telecoms sector, you might sort of see that they've done some amazing stuff and there's new technology and the price starts to rise. It's exactly the same sort of mechanics driving the fundamentals of a cryptocurrency coin. But that's the big difference between the crowdfunding and a cryptocurrency structure, because there is liquidity literally within 4 to 6 weeks of putting your money in.
Interesting. And it's any other examples out there that people are doing this successfully and what the platforms do?
There's today, literally, the 1st of June, there was one that raised $35 million in 30 seconds.
So talk us through the mechanics of what money flowed where or what money didn't flow where and who now has what.
Okay, so basically under normal circumstances with an initial coin offering or a token sale, and those are both euphemistically the same. I don't like the word ICO, I have to say, because it sounds like it's too much like a regulated structure. But basically people will generally pay upfront for the tokens in either Ethereum or in Bitcoin.
Right. So they will start up with some investment into the token.
Yes, absolutely. They will be supporting an ICO or a token sale through Bitcoin or through Ethereum.
Right.
So then the Bitcoin and Ethereum is then transferred over to the parties that are running the initial coin offering, and then via smart contracts, in other words, this if-then. So if the value hits a certain amount that they say they need, then the ICO actually happens. So if, for example, let's say there's a threshold where they say, right, we need to get this to work, we need $5 million. Let's just say that for random numbers. And if they hit $2 million only, then the smart contract says, if it's less than $5 million, then the money's returned, for example, less perhaps an escrow fee or something like that. But if it goes over $5 million, then that money is then committed, and the coins are then, the cryptocurrency coins or the tokens are then issued. And then once those coins are formally issued and they then get put onto the exchanges, that's when you have the liquidity event.
Super, super interesting.
I've got a 5-minute video introducing ICOs, and I did an article for the Australian Financial Review a couple of weeks ago. So happily, I'll flick you the details of those, and you can make those available to your audience if that's something you might find useful.
Well, if you're listening and you are interested, we've probably either drawn you in or pushed you away, probably one of the two, because it is a bit sort of a little bit mind-bendy. It reminds me, and I know I keep saying this, but it reminds me so much of the early internet where we were trying to understand how the pieces fit together, and I was trying to buy books on the internet, and sometimes you'd see a big fat book and it would just have not much tangible knowledge. And it's similar with blockchain and Bitcoin. You're learning bits and pieces everywhere to paint this big picture of how this all fits together.
Yeah, I mean, I would urge anybody to at least look into this space. Whether you decide to get involved or not is a different matter. But if you understand what you are doing and you have an element of risk tolerance, then the capital growth can be very significant. Ethereum has gone up by, literally it's gone up by 500% in the past 2.5 months, just through all these relationships that have been set up. And this is not investment advice at all.
Don't do it.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you do it, don't do it.
I mean, I would say educate yourself absolutely on anything that you can in relation to the cryptocurrency space. It's not going away.
Well, I think particularly if you're listening and you're an entrepreneur or a wannabe entrepreneur, just as the internet opened up opportunities that we couldn't even dream of. I mean, you look at all the jobs today, whether it's a social media manager, web developer, sysadmin. I mean, you could go on and on. Content marketer. All these jobs did not exist. All these businesses.
Even if you think of Google, you think of Facebook, you think of Skype,
businesses,
you think of Uber, you think of Airbnb. They could not exist without the internet.
If you are want to be entrepreneur and early on in your career, I would literally just
I would absolutely agree with you. I'm old enough and ugly enough to have got involved in the internet way back in February 1995.
February, you remember the month, right?
I remember it was February the 12th, 1995 at 2:16 p.m. in the afternoon.
Oh my God! Okay.
I went into an internet provider on the south coast of England and connected via a 14 4K modem.
I remember those
things?
well. I remember those well.
And connected on this concrete block that was called a monitor, in those days. And there was a picture of a painting from a local art gallery 10 kilometers away, came up one line at a time. This is where the blockchain is right now. And, I've been involved in it for 2 years because I rode the wave of the internet. And the blockchain is going to be 10, 20 times bigger than the internet.
I totally agree. It's we were talking. We have a ManageFlitter Twitter chat once a week, and yesterday there was a thread that went on about internet nostalgia. And I was saying, it said to one of the people, "Do you remember when the internet was so slow? We would switch off images on our web browsing to try and."
But the thing that's really interesting, what was the first browser you ever used? Was it Netscape or did you get
Mosaic? It was pre-Netscape.
Right. Okay. Well, Mozilla was one of the very first. Mosaic as well.
Yeah. Well, I think Mozilla is what Mosaic landed up being.
That's right.
Yes.
But the creators of Mosaic and Mozilla were the guys behind this ICO that closed today. It was called Brave.
So what's that? Mark Andreessen and crew?
No. It's I've forgotten the guy's name.
Because Mark Andreessen was the creator of Mosaic and Netscape.
Right. Well, he was the guy behind this created JavaScript and he was the CTO. So he created a lot of the tech underpinning it. And this is the one that raised $35 million in 30 seconds.
Yeah. Well, we're definitely.
Yeah. I mean, I could go on for hours about this, but it's
interesting. I'm still marginally frustrated because I don't understand it in completion. All these technologies, and that's why I'm listening to podcasts and audiobooks and buying books, and actually Princeton has a free online course on cryptocurrency.
Oh, okay.
Right, and I think they're not running it actively anymore, but the sequence of lectures and the course notes are all there.
Yeah.
So I think it's through Udemy.
Right, this could well be.
Yep. So if you're looking for a good way to learn it, you can go to the Princeton course.
There are lots of YouTube channels that look at the whole sort of cryptocurrency markets. There's one that's particularly good. I mean, obviously, It's a Monkey is the best podcast, so make sure that you stay with this one. But there's one called Crypto with a 0 at the end. He's actually an actor out of LA, but he puts 4 videos a day out on the cryptocurrency space.
Fantastic.
And it's really worthwhile checking out, I'd say. but obviously, It's a Monkey is the only one to listen to.
Don't worry about that. There's room for us all, Tim.
I know.
Tim Lea, the CEO of Veredictum, is also the author of Down the Rabbit Hole, a fantastic book that even our non-techie internal accountant, Jimmy, gave it the big thumbs up.
Thanks, Jimmy. You're a man and a half.
And thanks so much for joining us. We're going to drag you in a few months again because, no doubt the space moves very, very fast. And I was excited to see also when Tim and I met. I didn't even know you were a ManageFlitter user. And
I've been using. I'm a regular user, and I mean, for promoting Twitter for our upcoming token sale, it's going to be used 20 times over.
We've got to get you on our new platform, Manage Social. We've started bringing on a couple of people.
Oh, right.
Which has Twitter and Instagram.
Hey, we're early adopters. We'll take on anything. I'm very happy to test it out for you.
Let's do it. And I really appreciate your time this morning. And
thanks, Kevin. And
look forward to having you back.
Awesome. Thanks.